Hello everyone, welcome back to chapter number 12 of our Azure Cloud series. So in this chapter we are going to dive into another important networking service, that is domain name system, commonly known as DNS. So we'll begin by understanding what DNS actually is along with some key terminologies, and we'll uncover what happens behind the scenes when we hear the terms domain name system. After that, we'll head over to the Azure portal where we will create a small app and demonstrate how to map custom domain to it using Azure DNS. But before we dive in, let's quickly do a quick recap of what we covered in the previous chapter, that is chapter number 11. In that chapter, we explored the Azure Load Balancer, how it works behind the scenes, what the key components it includes, and how it helps to distribute traffic across multiple virtual machines. Also, we did a hands-on demo in that I showed you how load balancer works in real time. So if you haven't checked out chapter number 11 or any of the previous chapter in the Azure Cloud series, I highly recommend you to go back and watch those and then return to this chapter. It will give you a better context and a smoother learning experience. So now without further delay, let's begin by understanding what is DNS, why do we need it, and how does it works in real world scenarios. So let's get started. So let's try to understand what exactly is DNS or domain name system. So think of DNS is the phone book of the internet. Just like we use a phone book to look up someone's name and then find their phone number, DNS is used to look up websites domain name like www.technoarm.com and translate it into a machine-friendly IP addresses, for example 192.0.2.1. So let's break this down with a simple analogy. So imagine you are visiting a website like technoarm.com. So now humans are great at remembering the names, but not so good at remembering the strings of numbers like 192.168.0.1. On the other hand, computers doesn't understand the name, they just communicate using IP addresses. So here where DNS comes into the play. So behind the scenes, when you type a domain name in your browser, your computer connects to a DNS server to resolve that name to its actual IP address. Once the IP address is found, your browser uses it to locate the server hosting that website, and then the connection is established. So let's take a step back and imagine this with computers and people. So computers communicate with each other using IP addresses such as 192.168.0.1 or 192.60.0.2. They can communicate over the network. But whereas humans communicate using the names, for example, John. So we know the people with its name and accordingly we can communicate. So you don't remember your friend's phone number, you just know them by its name. Similarly, we don't remember the website's IP, we just type the domain names. And DNS bridges the communication gap between humans and machine. So what actually happens when you type technoarm.com in browser? So the browser first check its cache to see if it already known the IP address. If not, then it sends a request to the DNS resolver, which is often your internet service, we call it as ISP. Then that resolver asks various DNS servers to find out the actual IP, and once it finds the correct IP address for technoarm.com, it sends it back to the browser. And then the browser now uses the IP address to connect the server and load the website. To summarize, DNS is like a phone book. You search by name and it gives you the number of that person, which is in our case, which is IP address. IP address is what your computer actually uses to connect with a website, and that exactly what DNS does in world of networking. It resolves human-friendly names into a machine-friendly address, enabling smooth communication between us and the internet. So now let's try to understand the domain name system more deeply. What exactly happens behind the scenes when we type a domain like technorum.com in our browser. So now imagine if we open a browser and type technorum.com. Then our browser first check locally it looks its cache to see if already known IP address for this domain. If not found, then our browser it sends a request to a DNS resolver. This resolver is usually provided by your internet service provider. We call it as ISP. The resolver also checks its own cache memory of previously resolved domain names. If the IP address for technorum.com isn't there either, the resolver continues its journey. Then the resolver sends a query to the root server. The root server is first level in the DNS hierarchy. There are 13 logical root servers named A to M strategically located around the world. Now here is the key part. The root server doesn't know the IP address of technorum.com, but it knows where to send the resolver next. Then the root server directs the resolver to the TLD server, top level domain server. Since our domain ends in .com, the resolver is sends the .com TLD server. Then the resolver now asks the TLD server, that is, can you give me the IP address of technorum.com? Then the TLD server doesn't have the exact IP address either, but it does know the authoritative name server for that domain. Now the resolver is sent to the authoritative name server. This server is the final answer. It holds the complete detail about the domain including the exact IP addresses. The resolver sends a final query to the name server asking what is the IP address of technorum.com. The name server responds with the correct IP address, for example 192.0.2.1. Then the resolver now sends the IP address back to the computer, and our browser uses this IP address to establish a connection and load the website. One more important thing, once the resolver gets the IP address, it stores it in its cache for future use. So the next time you or anyone types technorum.com, it can respond immediately without going through all those steps again, making the whole process faster. So that's what happens behind the scenes when we type a domain in browser. A multi-step lookup process involves resolver, root server, TLD server, and name servers. Now that we understand full DNS process, let's switch to the Azure portal where we will create a small demo app and see how DNS works in action with some custom domains mapping. So once we log into the Azure portal, then we'll be navigating to the dashboard or landing page of Azure portal. Here I have created one static web app. In that I have just created or hosted some small React app. So once I click on this static app, I'll show you how it look. So this is the current URL for the static web app. So once I click on, it will be opening my React app. So I will close this, and in that I will simply map the or I'll simply add the custom domain because I have one purchased domain using the Hostinger. So I will just map the custom domain. So for that, let's do custom domains, and in that, so once we click on this custom domain, then we'll be navigating to this window. Here we'll add one entry, so let's click on add, and in that I'll add custom domain on other DNS. I'm not using the Azure provided DNS, so I have created my own. So let's click on custom domain on other DNS. So in that I have created the domain, that is this one, technorum.com. So once we add, let's click on next. So in that, let's generate the code from Azure. So let's click on generate code. So it will generate a code. Then so we need to copy this generated code and we need to create the text txt entry in the Hostinger portal. So let's create a txt record. So I will create here, and then I will click txt record and paste the value and click on add record. So if you can see the record new entry is added, and let's go back to the Azure portal. So now it is validating the details or the entry that we added. It will take some time for the validation, and once the validation is done, then again we have to create one CNAME or we have to configure the CNAME entry with the default domain that Azure provided. So it will be directly navigating or remapping to our React app. So now the validation is completed. So now again, let's copy this URL and then a record or CNAME record. So let's copy this and let's create CNAME record. So again, let's go here. Let's go here and type CNAME and then type paste the value. Let's click on add record and it will create a new entry, and again go back to the Azure portal. So let's check how it works. So like again go back to the overview page, and if you can see our newly created custom domain, it's mapped with this URL. You can see https://technorum.com. So let's click on this URL or just copy and paste it on browser. So you can see it is the React app is mapped to this technorum.com, and in this way this custom domain is mapped. So that's all about the DNS, that is domain name system, and how it plays a crucial role in resolving human readable domain names into a machine readable IP addresses. So in this way, we can create custom domains and map them with our hosted app on Azure, where it is a static web app, virtual machine, or load balancer. A quick recap what we understood in this chapter so far. So we started by understanding what is DNS and why it is important, how DNS works behind the scenes from the moment a user opens a browser and types in a URL, and how resolver works and how they navigate through the different servers like root server, TLD server, and finally named DNS server, and how the IP address is returned to the client and the browser is able to access the web page. And finally, we saw a real-time demo where we created a static web app, and we mapped the custom domain to our hosted React app using Azure Static Web App. So if you found this video very helpful, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe to support the channel. And if you have any questions or doubt, feel free to drop them in a comment section. I'll be happy to help. So stay tuned for upcoming chapters. Until then, as I always say, keep learning, happy coding, and have a great day.